All right. Good morning, and welcome everybody to the Immigrants Podcast. Today we have the pleasure of hosting the adorable, amazing Adi Granov. He is a visionary creator, artist, and designer with a very clear mission in life to entertain the whole world. Adi, your work has touched me personally as an individual. I have adored you for many years because I cannot draw for whatever reason. I love to play with a pencil, but I don't know what I can do with it besides out 1+1. Adi has an explosion of how he communicates and has touched many people around the world with his contributions to the Avenger movies, the Black Panther movies, Spider-Man, and on and on and on. Adi, welcome to the Immigrant Podcast. Good morning, and how are you feeling?
Thank you very much. Yeah, good morning. Or for me, it's afternoon, but I'm feeling good. Yeah, everything's good.
Excellent. So, Adi, when researching you, I was trying to figure out where I was going to start. And the one thing that really got to me was your immigration journey. It was profound to me how you migrated from Sarajevo and ended up in New York. And if you may please pick it up, give us the story of how you ended up in Portland.
Well, I was born in Sarajevo in former Yugoslavia. And then because of the breakup of Yugoslavia and the war in Bosnia in 1994, my mom, sister, and I became refugees in Croatia. And then while we were in Croatia for about a year and a half, originally we were meant to go to Germany, but things didn't work out. And then we were trying to find a place that would accept us and allow us to start a new life. And there was a program for refugees for the United States. So we applied, and after a process of interviews and various different things, we were accepted. And that's basically how it kind of the whole American journey started. And you mentioned New York, and actually New York was just a stop. But the fascinating thing was that we didn't know where we were going. Because as refugees, we needed to have a sponsor, and there wasn't a sponsor found for us. So we were being sent to a refugee center in Baltimore. But by the time we arrived in New York at JFK, there was a sponsor that has been found in Portland. And we were rerouted, basically. By the time we arrived in New York, we were rerouted instead of Baltimore to Portland, completely on the other side of the country. And at the time, I didn't even know where Portland was. But that's kind of the, in a nutshell, version of how we ended up in Portland.
Okay, very good. Because we're delving deep into how you found success as an immigrant, I'm going to start from where I think you started. Tell us about how you discovered drawing, how the war and your past history in Sarajevo influences you today in how you create and how you think through when you want to project your thought process.
As a kid, I just really got into comic books and especially European graphic novels, because that's kind of science fiction and that kind of stuff. So I was really interested in that stuff since I can remember. And then when the time came, we in Yugoslavia, we had a very German style system of education. So you choose a direction to go to. So it's not a general high school. It's more of a high school with a direction. So I really wanted to go to the art high school. So I became more serious about it in order to be able to pass the test to be accepted into that school. So I would say I kind of got more serious about it around 13, 14. And then I started that high school I guess I was still 14. And then the war started maybe 8 months later. So it was cut off. It was cut short. And really then during the war, hiding in basements from the war and the shelling and all of that, there was not much else to do but read comics and books and then draw, and that's all I really did to kind of keep sanity, I guess. And then at some point, when the UN peacekeeping forces arrived in Sarajevo, I realized that the French soldiers were really into art, and they somehow, through a convoluted set of circumstances, I started drawing portraits for them in exchange for chocolate and Coca-Cola. And that was my first kind of taste of, no pun intended, but that I could actually make something, because then I could resell the Coke and the chocolate for money, and I realized I could actually make money doing the art, which never really properly kind of occurred to me before. And then actually the money that I made by reselling the chocolate and cans of Coca-Cola was actually the money that we used to get out of the city and out of Bosnia when we became refugees.
That's mind-blowing. Oh my goodness, what a story. So I'm curious, during a war, I'm assuming you have no access to anything. I've not been through a war. I've lived in a country where we had tribal clashes, but I've not been through a war. But I'm assuming through a war, you do not have resources. You do not have a pen, a piece of paper. You're not getting access to books, lighting, and all that stuff. Who was a person who influenced who you've become today by providing you the tools you needed to survive at that time, yet to discover who you are going to become?
I mean, in the war, a lot of very odd things happen, and the different things kind of become reality. So at the beginning of the war, a lot of, because I lived in the center of the city, we lived in an apartment building, and then a lot of the apartments were left vacant because people left at the beginning or just before or just after the start of the war. And as kind of supplies ran out, I mean, there were more important things that ran out, food and then water, and then electricity was cut off. So we didn't have, much of anything. And we were literally burning the wooden floors from our apartment to keep warm in the winter. But as far as the art supplies go, once it kind of started running out, the stuff that I had, there was actually an architect that left at the beginning of the war, and then a family moved in as refugees because their building burned down. And one of the members of this family was a friend of mine, and suddenly there was this like treasure trove of art supplies in this old architect's apartment. So I remember ending up with a lot of like ink pens and stuff like that just from there. But really, I mean, I don't remember like having to trade anything for art supplies, because food and like toothpaste was actually a really big commodity. So I remember trading all kinds of stuff for toothpaste and just kind of stuff that you need for survival. But I think the biggest problem as far as art goes was actually light, and especially in the winter when the days are short. And because there was no electricity, we ended up making these, because candles ran out very quickly, and then we ended up making these oil lamps. Somebody knew how to make them, and you use a piece of cork and you put a piece of rope through it, and then you float it on a layer of oil on top of water, and then that, and I mean, it obviously didn't do my eyesight any favors, because drawing under that flickering, oil light was, not healthy. But on the other hand, you're being bombed, so it didn't really like, the danger of what that was doing to my eyesight wasn't really that high on my priorities list.
I'm going to get a little bit personal, because there's something that is important to a lot of immigrants. And I believe as an immigrant that if we can learn how to cope, it would allow us to thrive better in life. Being a child who was raised or born or experienced war. As an adult today, when you're sitting down and you're watching TV and you have these pictures of, say, for example, the war in Israel and Palestine, or you're watching some devastation somewhere in Africa, or you're looking at another one in Eastern Europe, Do those moments, do those pictures trigger you? And if they do, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I got older and life got more comfortable, it's actually more that allowed me to realize that I have actually PTSD that I never really allowed myself to like even think about, because life as a refugee and then trying to kind of make your way in life, you're so focused on like forward motion that you don't really allow yourself to think about stuff like that. But then, like I said, as life got easier or more comfortable, that's when I realized actually how different things influence me and take me back to, it's just like emotions and sometimes I don't even know what it is that like triggers something, but it's just like a wave of emotion that comes over me. And when the war in Ukraine first started, I really was quite I don't really know how to explain the emotion, but it really it had so many similarities to what had happened in Yugoslavia that it really reminded me a lot of how hard it is to go through something like that, to suddenly your home becomes a prison, and what feels safe suddenly is the opposite from that, and then having to leave your home to be at the mercy of other people, some not not good, some good, and you realize that when you're on the bottom of that kind of a I don't even know what it is, like bottom of food chain is the wrong term, but it's you realize that you really depend on the kindness of other people, but also so I think the actual danger of the war and the shootings and the bombings and stuff doesn't seem to trigger my emotional response as much as when I think about what then it takes for those people who survive to then actually go through, because I know how hard and how long the journey is to actually get from basically having everything taken away and to try to make your life through after that, if that makes sense.
It does. But there's still something I'm missing, Adi.
Yep.
You're here, you've been in America for a while, you've become an amazing contributor to society. You still are struggling with little things that were embedded into your psyche when you were growing up. Just walk me through, how would you advise immigrants that have experienced such situations, such trauma, to learn or to figure out ways to deal with that kind of trauma?
I mean, it's a really, really tough question, because I didn't really, I kind of just muddled through. I didn't really have any guidance at all, because I think, my sister is younger, and I think she had, some similar, but some more different, obviously being a woman as well, or a girl. And so we experience different things in different ways. And I was so desperate just to be able to have a normal life. And I was really into art and music, and I was so desperate just to get away from the aspects of war that everybody was trying to define me and my existence as a survivor of war. And I really wanted to just be able to do the things I wanted to do rather than have the war define who I was. So for a long time, I really refused to acknowledge that it had had any effect on me at all. So it's really hard. You're asking me to like offer advice, but I don't really think I dealt with it in like
that's great, because in not dealing with the situation, you're still offering us a little caveat, which is, if you are struggling with some things like this, or you're going through such traumatic situations, it would be best to see if you can seek help, given the fact that where you are today, you've not really confronted that to be able to get it out of your system. But I'm thinking that was also intentional, Adi. I think that's where you find your creative, and that's how you're able to come up with terrifying, amazing images that pull us from our dark shadows. Thinking about that, talk to me about how did you end up in the Marvel world? Let's get into the fun.
I mean, the thing is, just to kind of get, also, I think I was, I suppose, pretty lucky to be able to put all of my kind of frustration and fear and anger and all of that, I would just draw. And I had this belief that, you know, if I do really good work, I will just, it gave me worth, you know. So I felt, even when I was, incredibly poor and living in shelters and stuff like that, I felt I had something, and that something was the ability to create something that other people couldn't. And I realized that, even when I was, like I said, very poor, I had something that most, very rich people don't have, which was the fact that I could actually create something. So I had this strong belief that as long as I create work that is undeniable, that something, it didn't really matter who I was, where I was from, the work would speak for itself. So at times, I'm sure other people, including, my mom and stuff, thought that I was just completely wasting my life, because I had this belief that and it doesn't really matter. I just found art. I think it could have been, anything, but I really took all of that. So whenever I would be angry at something or frustrated or depressed or whatever, I would just start drawing and almost be like, I'll show the world that, I can create something, like I said, undeniable. So
yes.
And the thing is, I think that was probably my biggest kind of salvation through all of it, is that I had that. So I wasn't completely adrift. So even when everything else was falling apart, I would always draw. And in the end, it worked out. So it could have not have worked out, but in the end, it really did. So I just, even when I had failures and when I had things not go really well with art or whatever, I'd still come back to it and draw. And then eventually, it just, things started to kind of happen. And then as they start happening, one door opens, another door opens, and it just kind of grows and grows and grows from there. But the road to Marvel took, so I arrived in the US in 1995, and then I realized, probably wrongly so now in hindsight, it's just at the time I believed I really needed to go to college to get a degree, because I didn't know, I was kind of trying to find my way. And then I ended up going to college in Seattle for 2 years, and my work was good enough that during my graduation show, an executive from Nintendo came and offered me a job straight away. So from I don't know whether I should call it luck or I mean, luck was that he came there, but hard work paid off, and that's kind of where everything really started to change.
Okay, very good. So talk to us about one of the most profound projects that you've worked in, but nobody's seen.
Oh, that nobody's seen?
Yes.
Oh, God. I mean, there are a lot of those when you work for, big companies. Things get canceled, and so there's nothing really personal that I am that I was attached to and it didn't work out or anything like that, because usually if I create art, companies want to make money from it, so they want to publish it. They're just the sad thing is, because of my contracts, I actually can't talk about a lot of the projects that were canceled. So when I was at Nintendo, there were a lot of games that I worked on that just didn't make it for whatever. Actually, the best stuff I worked on didn't make it. But I wasn't really emotionally invested. It was just, working on Nintendo's project, and it doesn't make it. And it's the same thing with the movies or TV shows. With Marvel Studios now, with Disney. Sometimes you work on stuff and it just doesn't really, happen. But I don't really have like an emotional attachment. There's nothing really that like is eating at me in the back of my mind or anything like that. So there are many projects that didn't happen for whatever reason, but nothing that I'm like upset about.
Okay, so going back again to your early dark days, you talked about how the French as peacekeeping forces came in to brought you to a place of discovery, realizing, okay, there's something in me that can be productive. There's something in me that I can actually do with my life. What did that feel like when you made that discovery? And how has that insight helped you projecting in the future, be able to figure out, okay, this one project is going to be amazing, not because of the people around it, but because of the content that's going to come out of it?
Yeah, I mean, this goes to the whole thing of what I say, like the art being undeniable, and what I figured out fairly early on is that the art takes on a life of its own, and it doesn't at that point. If people want to dig and find who did it and the history and stuff, fine, that adds to like the experience or whatever. But the art just stands on its own, and I realized that during the war that it didn't really matter where I was from. It didn't really matter that it was Bosnia or Yugoslavia or whatever. That the art takes on a life, and as long as you can get it out there for people to see, it basically it becomes its own thing. And I did have quite a moment of clarity in those early days of the war. Maybe not even actually the war. It might have actually been just before the war, because I was really I had two big interests, and that was music and art. And I used to play with my teenage friends, playing like a band, and I used to play bass, and I was actually quite good at it. But I was also good at art, and I was dividing my time half and half. And now when I think about it, for a 15-year-old to have this realization, it's kind of impressive. But at the time,
yes, it is.
I just had this thing where I was like, okay, I obviously don't have time for both, to take both to be the best. So I had to make a choice to give up one. And, I don't actually know if I could do that today, but back then I really had a kind of a clarity of vision, and I was like, okay, I had to decide. And I was like, I am definitely more naturally talented for the art side than I am for music. So technically my music, bass playing ability was good, but my ear wasn't as good as my, eye for art. And I remember, at the time, my friends being really quite like amazed that like I was just basically throwing one away. I wasn't. It was a very difficult decision. It was just that I made a choice that, okay, I have however many 10, 12 hours a day, and if I dedicate all of them to one thing, that one thing is going to become so much better than if I'm splitting it, down the middle. And I don't think like today I would advise that to anyone. It's just what kind of worked for me. So then from that point on, art became my main focus. And then, like I said, in the war, when the French soldiers became interested in just, buying, I don't really know why. They were probably like souvenirs from the war for them or whatever it was. It didn't really matter, and it was often like, drawing a portrait of my wife, or drawing a portrait of my kids or whatever. But because the food, especially like luxury stuff, I mean, it's kind of silly to call it luxury, but Coca-Cola and chocolate were a big luxury. They were hugely valuable, especially for us. We had no means of making any other money, and suddenly I was able to actually save up pretty decent amount just from doing art. It really did confirm kind of the choices I've made.
All right, wonderful. Adi, please tell our viewers where they can find you on social media.
Oh, it's I'm mostly on Instagram, so it's just Adi Granov on Instagram. I have a website, but it's just is really just for contact, so it doesn't have anything on it other than the email address. Uh, and then yeah, I have a Facebook page as well, uh, and I think those two, Instagram and Facebook page, are the best, and they're just under my name, so Adi Granov.
Excellent, excellent. Talk to us about the 19-year-old Adi
Uh huh.
in a high school deciding whether I'm going to stay in high school or I'm going to jump off and do something better for myself.
Yeah, so you've done your research. It's funny. Um, yeah, so by the time I arrived in Portland, I was just, I guess, 95. So yeah, I was 18. And then that January 96, I turned 19. But because I was going to, my credits from art school, both in Sarajevo and Croatia, were all over the place because it was bits and pieces and stuff. They wanted me to stay in the American high school for another at least a year in order to be able to graduate. And I realized that my education was by that point far kind of beyond the level that I was getting there, and I felt like I was just going to waste a whole year of my life. And especially then there was also an element of embarrassment being, older than anybody else I was going to school with and stuff. So after about, I think maybe 3 months there, that's where I started to, I was asking different teachers in the high school, and then started to research what my options were if I actually didn't graduate high school. And I learned about the whole GED diploma, and that would then allow me to go to art college. And I realized that would be a very kind of not really a shortcut because I was already 19, but for me it would be a quicker way to try to achieve what I wanted to achieve. So then the summer of 96 is when I really worked very hard to kind of like figure everything out, and I went to get the GED diploma, which, to be fair, was very, very easy because my education from Bosnia and Croatia was at a very high level, because education in former Yugoslavia was at a very advanced level. So I got the GED, and then I decided to go to the Art Institute of Seattle, which is sadly a school or college that had long now disappeared. But at the time, it really allowed a very concentrated, it was a 3-year program that you can do in 2 years if you go year round. So, without any breaks, so it was, that's what I did. And that's what I focused on. And now when I think about it, actually was a very scary kind of thing to do, because it was the first time I was actually leaving, my family, and I was going to go off on my own and stuff. But I think being in this mode of being a refugee and moving around and going from shelter to shelter and then moving to the States, and to me it was just another thing to do. So now when I think about it, it seems like a very big step, but it's because I've become, comfortable and, but when I was young, it just, like I said, that's why I couldn't really focus, or couldn't even really allow, to realize that I had trauma and all of this stuff. It was just like, one foot in front of the other, and just trying to achieve the goals they weren't clear goals, but I had this idea that, as long as I am allowed to do art and I'm, able to show it to the world, things were going to work out. So I had this, blind belief, and that's why I just kind of, it was on a mission to I was some kind of an art terminator, trying to
as a young adult, you did not have very clear goals, but you had some goals. Now, as a mature creator, artist, what does goal setting for you look like? What would you say it should look like for a young adult?
I think I think for me, the secret really, and I didn't realize it at the time, it's just that now I can see it, I can see what the secret to my, I guess, success was. And it's the focus on becoming really good at something. And that's, what I did. So I kind of, put all my like chips onto this idea that, because a lot of people say, oh, well, if you want to be an artist, but, maybe you should study something else just in case that this doesn't work out or whatever. That's probably a very smart, that's probably smart advice. But for me, I was really just so focused on just getting as good as possible at the thing that I chose was going to be my thing. So for me, I mean, it's really hard to I don't want the responsibility of giving the same advice to someone else, because it's probably a bit dangerous. But I think it's also, I mean, I realized very early on that I had the ability that was above people around me, so I was, better at this thing, drawing and later on painting. I was better than anybody around me. And then when I, got to Portland and I went to that, high school, I realized that I was far better at art than anybody there. So it wasn't just a blind belief without something to back it up. I actually, had the confidence based on being able to see around me. And I think another really, really important element to like my advancement was that I also very early on realized that I didn't want to compete with those people around me. I wanted to compete with the people I saw in books and I saw, in movies. And so to me, being the best in class was it didn't really matter that much. I wanted to be, so I started to look at, at the time, I don't know really if they're even a thing anymore, but there were a lot of illustration annuals and like showcases and stuff. So at 19, 20, I started to look at those and be like, oh, okay, this is what's really good. And this is what's considered, and I would see they would often do competitions. And, this would be working professional illustrators. And I would look at, okay, who's number one, who's number two, whatever, and be like, okay, this is my competition. So, my friend in class, I was happy to be, better or whatever. But that didn't really matter, because in the end, once I was out in the world, I wasn't going to be competing just against my friends. I was going to be competing against all of these professionals. So probably not even without like clear knowledge, I obviously had a very, very kind of clear vision of what I needed to do for my art to be, good, but also commercially successful. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question you asked, but it's just kind of, I haven't really thought about this stuff in a long time. So it's kind of like in this conversation, it's making me kind of like, go through it.
Very good. The idea is for us to pull nuggets that actually equip immigrants to become successful. And so far, you've given us a billion ideas. Here's an interesting one for you, Adi. You obviously have enjoyed watching movies over the years. You've obviously enjoyed music over the years. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're sitting at a movie, you're not involved in it, and as you're watching it, your mind starts creating and you can't help yourself, but you want to step out and go create what you're feeling after watching a movie or being part of a movie?
I mean, yeah, of course. It's a really interesting thing, actually, to be part of the industry, because I grew up watching movies, and to me, movies and comics were a much bigger influence on what I became than actually my surroundings, or the people in Bosnia. And I really was very influenced by science fiction, especially. It just really spoke to me, and I. When I was a kid, when Star Trek: The Next Generation first premiered, that was one of the biggest things for me. So, but then obviously as like my career progressed and I became involved in Hollywood movies and these big Marvel movies, my vision and enjoyment of movies is a bit different, because before I would be just very, very inspired by them. But now when I go and watch something, I can really enjoy it, but also I can think, that bit isn't really as good as it could have been, or I can be like, oh wow, I wish I had thought of that, and all of it is kind of like adds bits and pieces into, because art and what I do, it's so much about observing everything around me, and having a lot of I'm really interested in pretty much everything around me, because it informs something in my art, and I don't ignore anything that might be boring or whatever. It isn't really. It can all inform what it is that I'm doing in art, and I have a very engineering kind of approach, and I like to break things down and understand how and why they function. So when I watch movies, to answer your question, I really get really inspired when I see that a lot of thought has gone into something, and I can break it down and it still makes sense. And the same, on the other side of on the flip side of that is like, if I see something and at first it's like, oh wow, but then you start kind of like breaking it down and you're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense at all, and that really takes me out of the enjoyment of. But that definitely has become more and more pronounced more I've been involved in, that side of like.
Is there a movie you've watched and you missed being a part of the creative?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a really big fan of both Mad Max and Blade Runner. So when the new Mad Max Fury Road and the new Blade Runner came out, I really wished that I was a part of it. Actually, Dune, the latest Dune, also. And I watched it, and I was very, very emotional watching the latest Dune, just because it had the space, I don't mean the space as in like universe or whatever, but like the room to breathe. It had a lot of like kind of a epic, almost like an epic silence to it, and it really inspired me. It really, I really like. And this kind of goes back to an earlier question you asked, and a big part of my kind of personality as I got older is I really enjoy melancholy and like that kind of like music that makes you feel like almost out of time, and that's so watching Dune, it made me feel, it's part of visuals, music, but also the pacing, and it really made me feel like, oh, I wish I was a part of that, because it felt like the kind of thing that I would really be proud of to have been a part of. So I think those three movies probably more than anything else. But I think it also, part of it goes back to all three being continuations or remakes of stuff that I watched as a kid. So Mad Max, because for me, how a lot of people, for them, the biggest thing from childhood is Star Wars. For me, it was Mad Max. So to watch the new Mad Max, I mean, it's now not that new, but the latest one, and for it to be just as good or better than it was what I remember as a kid was just such a big thing. So yeah, those are like the films that I really wish like I could have been a part of.
Excellent. And you are the top of the food chain. As far as I'm concerned, you really are the top of the food chain. Based on where technology is at today, how do you think AI is going to change, influence the life and the talent of the creatives moving forward?
I mean, it really depends, I think, on how it develops, because I don't think that it's here to stay. You can't really undo progress. I am a bit probably I kind of feel a bit up on the outside of it, because most of my work is traditional. So I paint on board with physical paints. So I kind of feel probably a bit spoiled from that perspective, just because it doesn't influence me in the same way that it's really terrifying a lot of other artists who work digitally, because it's much closer to what they do. And the way it currently is, obviously, with the scraping of, AI doesn't invent. It takes what exists, and then it, kind of remixes it, and smudges it together into what I consider currently very, very ugly art. But as progress goes on, it will definitely get less and less ugly and less, more and more difficult to discern what's AI and what isn't. And then it just becomes down really to the ethics of it and the laws to be built into preventing other people's work being used. And actually, what's going to happen is, I am assuming that companies will hire artists to create assets that then AI can turn into more assets. So, for instance, if I get hired, I'm not saying that I would agree or anything, but I'm kind of making a point. If I get hired to create a new art style and a new look for something, and I can do, just as a single artist, I can do, let's say, 10 paintings, but then they can feed those into the AI program, and then the AI can extrapolate and create hundreds based on the style I have created. But they own that style because they pay the artist, for that. And that's where, tricky things will happen, because, then production art is what's going to suffer. Production artists, because it already happens in animation where, a lead artist will create, a key scene or a sequence, and then production artists will take that and turn it into an animated thing. And I think those people will probably be the most harmed by AI, because the AI will be able to take over a lot of that work. That's my vision, and I'm not saying that's my vision that I want it to happen, but I think that's kind of where the wind is blowing, I would say.
So we talk about the most profound work that has not been seen by anybody. So let's talk about what is profound but everybody has seen. What is one of the projects that you were involved in that was an amazing project for you? For me, the creative behind Venom was like, I just blown my mind. I've always been curious, how did you become the person who drew that up?
Well, for me, Iron Man was basically what changed my life, and it changed a lot of people's lives. Iron Man was the thing that kicked off the Marvel cinematic universe. Is the thing that was the first project that Marvel Studios did, and I happened to I started working for Marvel in 2003, and Iron Man wasn't very popular at the time. It was kind of like a B-list. By that point, it was kind of considered very old-fashioned. And then, as a fairly new artist at Marvel, but I had a very unique style at the time. They offered me to do Iron Man covers, and I kind of, really seized the opportunity and did, what at the time for me was the best work I can do, and that led to them offering me to do a relaunch of Iron Man in a comic book form. So not just the covers, but the whole book. And that book, it didn't start out as a huge success, but it kind of built up and built and built and built. And then by the time they started talking about doing the Iron Man movie, that book really was the biggest inspiration. And Jon Favreau, the director of Iron Man, really embraced that book and my work. And then when we connected, he asked me to work on the movie. And then my vision of Iron Man is kind of what became the vision of the movie. And then also my art style became kind of like the house style for Marvel Studios. So really, that was the project that, technically, from an artistic point of view, I was already starting to get success, but comics don't pay all that great, and my work takes a long time. So I was very, every page is painted. So I was very broke. So when the movie started, it actually really did change everything. It kicked open all of the doors that are still open. So that for me was probably the most pivotal thing. The thing is, it's years and years and years of building the skill to get to the point to be able to embrace a project like that. So I wouldn't say it's the most important thing in my life, because the most important thing in my life is the ability, to do the art. But as far as projects go, that's really where my artwork got to reach, millions of people, and that's really like that was what changed everything for. Like I said, obviously the film was a big success, so it changed everything for a lot of people. But for me personally, it was a really, really big, huge change in life.
Excellent. Wonderful work. Adi, one more time, remind us, where can we find you on social media and online?
Yeah, it's Instagram, just under my name, Adi Granov. So, I'm on there quite often. I post my art and I post works in progress, and whenever I can, that's kind of like my main. I mostly post just art, and like if I'm working on a new painting, I post, kind of sketch to finish type of stuff. So Instagram, under my name, and then I have a Facebook page also, which is under Adi Granov Illustration, and on both of those, it's kind of similar content on both. For I find there are different audiences for Facebook and for Instagram. I was never one. I never embraced Twitter, so I'm not on Twitter. It never really worked for me. But yeah, Instagram was always kind of like my place. So
excellent. Adi, what projects are you working on now, and what should we expect in the coming months?
I'm mostly working currently on I'm doing a series of covers for Marvel. I'm working on a video game that I can't even mention. And then I'm going to be doing some other game art. So I think it's 3 different games that I'm working on. Currently, because of all the strikes in Hollywood and stuff, there hasn't been any film work happening all year. But I'm designing a Star Wars statue that is kind of a continuation of something I did previously. And then I'm really looking forward to a vacation. I only take one vacation really properly a year, and it's usually end of the year because I don't like short days, so I try to break it up. But yeah, work-wise, project-wise, there isn't really anything that I can announce because all of the things I'm working on, big things, are under NDAs and contractual kind of. So there will be things coming out, but I'm not at liberty really to like announce them yet.
Of course.
Other than the covers.
So here is something I find interesting, Adi. As an immigrant, do you find time to connect with your home roots anymore? And when you interact with other immigrants, what are your conversations like? I'm friends with my childhood friends, most of whom are still in Bosnia. Facebook is a really good. I know I'm showing my age because it seems like Facebook is like for middle-aged people now, but, right?
We're all on Facebook, so we kind of keep up with kind of just the news in general, kind of day-to-day stuff. I haven't been back to Bosnia in quite a few years because we don't really have anything there anymore. My grandmother died 10 years ago now, and then that was kind of like the last real link there. We all have different. I think the interesting thing about being an immigrant is, especially a refugee, and not being able to choose where you go, is that everybody now has had very different paths. So I talk to people who became refugees or immigrants or whatever, same as me, from Bosnia, and there were kids that I went to school with, but our stories have been so different because we ended up in different places, and that continuity has been broken. So, and then people who have stayed in Bosnia have had a very different life than I have. So we have, usually when you get, it's one of those things that when you get back, together, you kind of start reminiscing about the things that we still have in common, which are usually the things that happened when we were kids, because the things that are happening now are so far apart that it's difficult really to even associate or connect, just because we have such different priorities. And sadly, obviously, as kind of time goes on, a friend of mine from childhood died recently from cancer, and I was looking at a photo of, I guess it would have been 1990, so just a year or two before the war really started, and we were on a school trip, and I think we were all about 12, 13, and there's a photo of us all in Herzegovina, going on this school trip, and maybe there's 7 or 8 of us in the photo, and 2 are gone now. And I know as time goes on, more and more of that will happen, and but it just really made me feel very emotional, just because I remembered, who we were as kids, and how, we were quite happy, especially in some of those moments. Bosnia was never wealthy, and we were never, I didn't have any rich friends, and we were never, but we did have, good times. But yeah, it's just, you kind of realize, when I was looking when this friend died, I realized I didn't know him anymore. I knew him as a, 13, 14-year-old. But it did make me very sad that this whole lifetime happened, and, I wasn't really, well, I mean, just what happens in life, but we didn't really have much of a connection after that, and his whole lifetime happened, and then now he's gone. So that really did make me very emotional, just from kind of I don't know, like, I don't even know what to call it.
Let me jump in there.
Yeah.
As an immigrant, do you feel like there's certain times when you have had moments of loss, moments of loneliness, because you're disconnected from what was originally your motherland, and you're also disconnected from where you are because you still are in the process of understanding what that culture looks like, and you're trying to fit into that culture?
Well, I mean, a part of the thing that we haven't touched upon is that I don't live in the US anymore. I've lived in England for, the last almost 19 years. So I've really changed cultures, very, very severely 3 times. And I really do often struggle to, especially also because of what I do. I don't really know, especially where I live, almost anybody else who does what I do. So my life is very different from pretty much, I do feel out of step with most people. So, I can associate to a lot of people on different things, but there isn't really anyone that, even like, 50% is probably as close as it can get. But there's always like an element. So there are different people. I mean, I think it happens to most people anyway in life, but to me, it feels like, different people I can talk to about different things. So different interests. And it's almost like having separate groups of friends for specific interests. So I'm really into strength sports, so like weightlifting and stuff like that. So there's a group of people I can talk to about that. Then there's a group of people I can talk to about art. And then I'm into classic cars. And then there's a completely different group of people I can talk to about that. But then when it gets to the refugee experience, there's a very, very small group of people that I come across that we can talk to about that. So instead of connecting on specific experiences, I find that I connect more on just overall perspective on life. So I always say, I'm really into very specific interests, so I can really understand people who have specific interests, even if they're not the same as mine. But I can have, this association. So I can connect with people who have been, who are immigrants from and have had a completely different experience to mine, but we will have certain elements that we can connect on. So I think I've had to become, I guess, a lot more adaptable to being able to communicate with people, because most people and I don't have that shared experience. We haven't gone through it in the same way.
Yep.
So so like I think I have a friend who's from Croatia, and he wasn't an immigrant. He still lives in Croatia, but he had been through the war, and he had seen the war. But he's also an artist and a really good friend of mine, and he's also a really amazing artist. So he and I can talk about a lot of stuff and fill in the holes in each other's knowledge, because we've experienced similar events from different perspectives. But then we also have this unifying thing, which is the art, and working for Marvel and stuff like that. So I think it's just kind of you adapt, I guess, and move forward.
Excellent. Adi, to become very successful, you get into partnerships with a lot of people. How do you advise others, aspiring artists, business people, business immigrants, to look at becoming partners so that they can increase their rate of success, or they can be more effective, more efficient, and more impactful in the world?
I mean, I think it's really important to look in the mirror and to see and understand what your strengths and also weaknesses are, or shortcomings, and to be able to improve upon those. And I think I've tried to be really good at that, and to be quite objective, and be able to not just blindly push forward with my emotion, but to be able to pull away. And so I'm kind of in a roundabout way answering the question, but I realized I wanted to be an artist working in kind of the superhero and science fiction genres. And I realized that the fact that I was an immigrant or a refugee or any of this stuff really objectively didn't have any bearing on that. So I had to be able to pull away and look objectively at the things that I needed to do to direct this like train or ship or whatever of my ability to become that. So I consciously actually to kind of rewind, so my advice is to try to be as objective about what you can achieve and what you want to achieve as possible. And I'm not saying to like change yourself or anything like that, but like so one thing I didn't want to do as a refugee, or as a having been through the war or whatever, I didn't want to, because I didn't really have an interest to capitalize on that and profit from that, because I didn't have creatively really interest in that. So I didn't want to do comic books about being a refugee, or comic books about I now realize that my experiences have influenced what I do, but not in such a direct way. In more kind of subconsciously have influenced my aesthetic and my likes and dislikes, but not in a way that like I had constantly worn my immigrant or refugee thing on my shoulder for everybody to see constantly. So to talk about, like you're asking about partnerships, it's basically when you go into a partnership, if you're working with a movie director, or you're working with another artist or a writer or whatever, it's I try to be objective about what I can offer and what I'm willing to compromise on, and then go from there. So it's the ability to communicate and the ability to be realistic about what it is that you're trying to achieve. But I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
When preparing for the podcast, what's the one question you were hoping I would ask you?
Oh, honestly, I don't think about it. Uh, I think this is another probably strength of mine, or whatever. Maybe it's not strength. Maybe it's but I try to be like spontaneous, and I try to build up my like, I guess, knowledge and strength and whatever. So then when things come up, I can respond, and I find also that results in much better like answers, and it results in, so I didn't really think about it. I knew that it was going to be about the, part of it about the immigrant experience and my experience going through it, but I didn't really uh you know I so yeah, I don't really.
Thank
I
you so
didn't.
much for your candor. Thank you. One last question.
Huh?
If you were immigrating to another country today with as much influence as you have in the world and with as much wealth of knowledge as you have today, how would you advise others to migrate to a new society and apply themselves in a way that is positive and builds other people?
I mean, again, it's really difficult for me to think whether this is advice I would want to give to someone. This is just what I went through and what worked for me. And a lot of people probably held it against me, but I wanted to go. So when I emigrated, and I really actually, at the time, like, Seattle was a big music scene, and to me it seemed like a really, interesting place to be at. So that's why I was really driven to be there. And I didn't really have any regard to where Bosnian refugees were, or where I didn't want to be in another Bosnia in the US. I wanted to go after my interests. So my interests were, like I said, science fiction, comics, art, music. So I was going after that, not after, comforts of home or comforts of. So that worked for me, and that. And again, it's going about the whole thing that I was talking about, looking in the mirror, and basically, because as soon as we arrived in Portland, we were immediately introduced to like the Bosnian society in Portland and all of this stuff. But I realized that didn't really, aside from being from Bosnia, I didn't really have that much in common with anybody there. So, I wanted to go, to concerts, and I wanted to build this life that I, kind of dreamt for myself to have. So I sought out people not based on where they were from, or the color of their skin, or a religious background, or anything like that. I sought out people who were into the same kind of art and music and movies and stuff that I was into, and that it really did do me huge favors, and it worked out hugely, because, like I said, I wasn't this is probably the wrong word to use, because it might work for some people, but for me it felt like I wasn't shackled to my past,
Yes.
or, because I thought, even at that age, I thought, okay, if I was still in Bosnia, would I be going to these kind of Bosnian clubs, or would I be going to a heavy metal club to listen to my favorite bands? And I was like, oh yeah, of course I would be going to a heavy metal club. So now, being in Portland or Seattle, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go watch a heavy metal concert, not, and like I said, I wouldn't really say that's advice. That's just what worked for me. And if I was to do it again, that's exactly what I would do again, just because it has proven, pretty successful. But like I said, I'm pretty sure that there are people probably who have held it against me, because, they maybe felt that I didn't, I don't even know like what the right word is, but that like I didn't embrace my, heritage, whatever it is.
Excellent, excellent. Adi, there is millions and millions of people around the world like myself that are all constantly, hopefully, waiting to see what you will produce for us because you've changed our lives dramatically. And for that, and on behalf of each and every immigrant across the world that adores what you do and respects what you do, I want to say thank you for your time. But before you go, one more thing. Talk about your fascination for cars and watches.
Well, it's part of the whole interest in mechanical things and engineering, and I like things I mean, cars is something that I was really into when I was a kid, just in movies and stuff. And in Bosnia, we didn't really have like nice cars. We had pretty kind of Eastern Bloc type of cars. But when I was a kid, Porsche, especially the 911 Turbo, that was the car that came out around the time I was born, and then it was kind of the car, the dream, so to me it was a fascination from a very early age. And I remember my father went to Germany and then brought back a couple of models, little toys of a Porsche 911 Turbo. And I didn't see one in person until I was in my 20s, but for me that was kind of I guess emotionally it was something that takes me back to my childhood, and really being fascinated by him. But also it's kind of almost like to myself, not to other people, I don't care about that, but to me it's like a form of a sign of achievement that I have been able to. And it's not even to me now, it's it's almost like I have made my 8-year-old self proud. So
Yes.
I, as now 47-year-old man, go back to this 8-year-old self, I kind of feel like I would have been impressed with what I had become. And to me that is a very important thing, because my childhood was cut short by the war, and I didn't really have a very happy family life either. So I have. It's not really about how I feel today. It's more about how I feel towards, this kid that had a pretty hard, time, especially with the war and everything. So a lot of those things that were taken away to not just me, but all of the kids, in all wars and not just wars, but in horrible places. Sorry, I'm kind of getting lost. It's a two side answer. One is the fascination with the mechanical and engineering and just design and all of that, but the other one is this emotional connection to some of these things that I'm really into.
Excellent. Adi, thank you so much for your time. I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to cut it short here. Thank you so much. It's been an amazing hour. Listen, the next time we're in the UK, we will make an effort to make sure we get together, enjoy a meal together, maybe smoke a cigar, and eventually maybe do a second podcast. There's so much more we did not talk about, but thank you so much and have a glorious day.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. Same.